America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. It's our 250th birthday of America, and you're listening to a very special edition of Shaboom. I'm your host, proud American and baby boomer Rick K. Jones. Here is a gentle reminder about our United Taste of America podcast series from iHeart. It's part of our celebration of America 250. This week is a big week, our celebration of 250 years of American greatness. America 250 should be fun all across the country as we celebrate together our heritage, and heritage is the word of the week. I have lots of thoughts on our collective American heritage. You know, all of us, or our relatives anyway, came from somewhere else. They came from someplace else, including the Native Americans. I was reading an article earlier this week about fox that traveled across the Bering Sea and followed people that followed. And so it was interesting, the migration of animals that came across the Bering Sea along with the Native Americans that traveled early on into our country. Then there's the story of the Mayflower. Almost everybody knows that story of the Pilgrims landing at Plymouth Rock. They found a significant number of American tribes, including the namesake Massachusetts tribe. There are over today 35 million Americans who are descendants from those people that came on the Mayflower. These include actors Meryl Streep, Matt Damon, Alec Baldwin, Clint Eastwood, the late Humphrey Bogart, along with people like Franklin Roosevelt, Laura Ingalls Wilder, Taylor Swift, and Ernest Hemingway. That's pretty amazing. One of the passengers on the Mayflower was a guy named Henry Sampson. And one day on that journey across the water, he fell overboard into the sea, but he was rescued. It's a good thing because two of his descendants grew up to be presidents of the United States, George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. The Pilgrims were Englishmen and women who had previously settled in Holland before traveling to America for religious reasons. They had a very tough first winter, but they were assisted by the Native Americans who helped them survive. And collectively, they celebrated what we know as the first Thanksgiving in 1621. Later, we had mass immigration from Europe, people fleeing religious persecutions, other freedoms, plus the availability of cheap land in America. One of the things that I've discovered in our United Taste of America series as we travel around to each of the 50 states and talk about the culinary history of America is that the people that built the railroads owned land on the right-of-ways. You built a railroad and you literally owned land on either side of the tracks. And they wanted people to buy that land, to settle that land so that they had customers for shipping goods, agricultural goods, manufactured goods, whatever, raw materials, mining goods, whatever, on their railroads. And they would send sales agents to Europe. Sales agents would go to Europe, to Germany, to Holland, to England, to Czechoslovakia, to all kinds of different places and encourage people to come to America because land was inexpensive. Of course, we had one group that came not on their own volition, enslaved peoples from Africa that were, bound into slavery and brought on boats and came here and have contributed so much to Americans' heritage going forward. Then there are the Hispanics. We had so many, and we continue to see so many people migrating from Mexico, migrating from Latin America into America, and so many others. And so we as a society are this gigantic bowl of gumbo. If you think about gumbo, it's four cultures in a pot. You've got the roux that comes from the French. You've got the sofrito, or what we call the Holy Trinity, that comes from the Spanish. You have okra that comes from Africans, and you have sassafras that comes from Native Americans. That is really the story of America. I love history. I've always loved history. I had a wonderful professor in college named George Shriver. I'll tell you a funny story about George Shriver. He taught Western civilization. The first day of class, he told everybody, I want you to know that everybody gets a B in this class. And he said he was done. His grades were done. Because he noted that everybody that stood up and high-fived, those were the C students. And everybody that came after class and bitched, they were the A students. He was done. Then he could get on with teaching his class. But George Shriver had such a great love for history. And I had great history teachers throughout my educational career. And then there are those great moments in American history that we know all about. And these great moments led to what I consider to be American exceptionalism. You know, we gained our independence from England. It started with this year. Hey, we didn't become really a country until we defeated the English, till they surrendered in 1781. So we've got a long battle coming ahead of us. But we're kicking off our celebration of 250 years this year with the celebration of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th. We survived then a second war with England, the War of 1812, where the English said, you know what, let's go take the colonies back again. Somehow we survived, and our flag survived. Our national anthem comes from the flag that flew in Baltimore Harbor and was still there after the invasion by the Brits. We had a horrible Civil War. There's no question about it. I'm a big Ken Burns fan. You can watch his original, one of his earlier films, The Civil War, that tells the story of that tragedy. But somehow we put our pieces back together. Somehow we were able to put the country back together. And one of the results was the freedom of those enslaved peoples. We freed the slaves. That war was fought over slavery, and we were able to free the slaves. And blacks have made such a great contribution to the history of America. We fought lots of wars and lots of treaties that helped us grow our land mass. We took land away from Mexico. We took land away from the French with the Louisiana Purchase. We took land away from Canada and the Brits in many cases. Then we fought two wars, where we played a pivotal role in both the First World War and certainly in the Second World War. You know, in my lifetime, I was blessed to see some amazing presidents. It starts with the first president when I was a child was Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower had led our efforts in the Second World War in Europe, was the Supreme Commander. We know him for D-Day and the ability for us to defeat Germany. He later became president of the United States. Let me tell you about Dwight Eisenhower. In 1952, both parties wanted to nominate him for president. That's how close we were as a people. We're a little fragmented today, but at that point we were more together than ever. Eisenhower built our great interstate highway system that we all enjoy today. Then came along John Kennedy, really the first of his generation to be president of the United States, a young man that was tragically taken from us too early. I voted for Jimmy Carter. He was a fellow Georgian. He had been the governor of Georgia and ran for president and won in '76. Jimmy Carter probably was a better former president than the president. He had an unbelievable career of doing things like building habitat homes and having peace initiatives and eradicating diseases and all sorts of things as a person. But I voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980. That's when I really started following politics in a big, big way, and I think Reagan was a great, great president. Reagan often quoted John Winthrop. John Winthrop was a Puritan minister in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and he preached a sermon in 1630 that is famous to be known as the City on the Hill idea. We shall be a city upon a hill The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we deal falsely with our God in this work we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword throughout the world. Reagan revived and reinterpreted that speech, that phrase, firstly in a speech he gave in 1974, where he used it to inspire his audience and frame the United States as a nation set apart by its values and, yes, its destiny. He used it again in his farewell address in 1989, where he connected it to America's role as a beacon of freedom and opportunity, a city on the hill. I really do believe in American exceptionalism. In Reagan's hands, the phrase shifted from Winthrop's solemn warning about moral accountability, the accountability we have to God and to our fellow man, to a celebration of American exceptionalism, optimism, and the nation's ability to attract immigrants seeking a better life. Reagan often paired it with the image of that shining city on the hill, emphasizing hope, hard work, and the belief that the United States could be and should be a model for the world. As we approach this 250th birthday celebration, I still believe in Reagan's interpretation of a shining city on the hill. I still believe in American exceptionalism. We are not perfect, but we are exceptional. And why is that? Because Americans of all stripes do exceptional things individually and collectively. You know, throughout history, the world of war, the results of war was, I kill you, I take your stuff. I take your land, I take your cattle, I take your wives, I take your children, I take your stuff. We fought the Second World War, defeated Germany and Japan, and then we Americans, through the Marshall Plan, gave them the money to rebuild their countries back. Who does that? Well, nobody had ever done it before, and nobody's done it since. That, my friends, is American exceptionalism. We are great because our people are great individually and collectively. And one example is my guest today. David Duncan is the head of the American Battlefield Trust. The American Battlefield Trust was formerly known as the Civil War Trust. I'm going to let him tell you what they do, but they do things that matter. They help us remember our history, and they find sacred land where we fought battles, and they protect that land in a big way. In honor of David today, I brought my cap for the American Battlefield Trust. I'm going to put it on for our interview. Let's welcome David to Shaboom. David, thanks for being with us today.
Rick, thank you for the invitation. There's nobody else I'd rather spend the 4th with.
Well, I appreciate it. You know, we start every guest with the same question. Where were you reared, and who were some of the early influencers in your life?
Oh, boy. Well, my story actually begins in southwestern Virginia. I was born in a small city named Roanoke. And then when I was 2, my parents moved to an even smaller town right next to it called Salem, Virginia. It's not far from Blacksburg. Those of you who are familiar with Virginia Tech, it's only about 30 or 40 minutes away from there. But it was a town of about 35,000 people. So truly, I grew up in small town America in the mountains of southwestern Virginia. And it was a wonderful existence. I didn't appreciate it at the time, of course. I thought it was too small town and I couldn't wait to get out of there. But I look back on it now, and you could not have had a better growing up experience than I had. My dad was a middle school history, civics, and social studies teacher. I'll say that again, middle school. He taught middle school for 38 years. I don't know how he didn't come home every night and beat us, but he didn't. But I got obviously my interest in history from him. He didn't drum it into me, he didn't beat it into me, but um, every Saturday we would go to the Roanoke City Public Library, and I got to take home as many books as I could carry. And so I developed this childhood interest in history. I wanted to be the third grader who knew more about the Civil War than anybody else. Um, as I got older, though, that interest kind of went away, and I started getting into some other things, music, journalism. I was editor of my high school paper and thought that was going to be my career after I got out of high school. I was supposed to go into the radio or TV business, but that didn't happen. My dad didn't discourage me actively from being a history major in college, but I could tell he didn't want me to end up being a middle school history, civics, and social studies teacher, just because of the economic challenges that posed. Um, but it was always there, even when I was doing other things, and it kind of reawakened during the Ken Burns Civil War documentary. I met my now wife of almost 40 years. She was already working in Northern Virginia, so I followed her up to this area. I'm sitting right now in Fairfax, Virginia. And I had a long commute to my first job, which was a fundraising job that I fell into. I was getting married, needed a job, and they were going to pay me $15,000 a year to be an entry-level copywriter, and that sounded good to me. But I had a long commute. The Ken Burns series, as I said, kind of reawakened this youthful interest in history and Civil War that I had. I was now living closer to Civil War battlefields that I could actually visit. And so that's when it started. I just developed this passion for American history, particularly military history, particularly the American Revolution up through the Civil War, and started going to the battlefields, and that changed everything.
Well, you're in such proximity to so many famous places. Two quick stories. Salem, Virginia, is the home of Division III basketball.
Yep.
The national championships. I was a Division III basketball coach at Swanee at the University of the South in my 20s, and Salem was Mecca because you
Yep.
wanted to get your team to Salem, and the town has always done such a marvelous job of hosting that national championship. And then I've told this story before on our podcast, but I gave a speech. I don't remember what year it was, in Chicago, and a woman came up to me after the speech named Lynn Novick. And Lynn said, I work for a guy named Ken Burns, and we need some corporate sponsors. Would you come visit with us? And I went to Ken Burns's farm in Walpole, New Hampshire.
Wow.
About 6 months before the Civil War came out.
Wow.
Spent the day with him, had a bowl of soup, I'll never forget, on his porch, went through the whole process, and a few weeks later, he called me back and said, hey, I got good news for me, not so good news for you. I have done a 10-picture exclusive deal with General Motors.
Oh, boy.
If you remember, the Civil War was underwritten by General Motors. Today, most of his films are underwritten by Bank of America. But it was General Motors that did a 10-picture deal with him. He had done some films, Brooklyn Bridge, but nothing of that significance as the Civil War. But one of my most treasured gifts is I have a VHS series. I don't even have anything to play it on anymore. In my office, given to me by Ken Burns.
Oh, that's great.
War, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, that was a cultural phenomenon unlike anything we've ever seen in the battlefield preservation business. Just a couple of months ago, we co-hosted a film festival in Gettysburg, talking about various different films over the years, the film Gettysburg itself and many others that have had impact. And Ken was part of that. And actually, after all this time, I got to meet him for the first time. And I got to introduce him for one of the speeches that he gave. And it really struck me that I was standing there introducing Ken Burns, me as president of the American Battlefield Trust. I probably would not have been standing there but for Ken Burns, because of the how it awakened again that childhood interest that I had, and then I kind of forced my way into one of our predecessor organizations and worked for a great guy named Jim Lighthizer for 20 years. And then when Jim retired, I went for the job and the board made me president. But I would not have been there if I had not been inspired, back in the early 90s by Ken Burns.
Well, it's interesting kind of how it comes full circle. So you fall in love or back in love or even more in love with history because of the Civil War. And now recently he's come out with the Rev War.
Right.
And so yeah, at a interesting time here at our 250th, and y'all have, as you pivoted from what was called the Civil War Trust to the American Battlefield Trust, you really did begin to put an emphasis on Rev War places because we had forgotten in many ways the story of our independence and what happened, and y'all have played a huge
Absolutely,
role in
Rick.
that.
Yeah, and that's how these things happen. Was as you mentioned, we were for many years exclusively a Civil War battlefield preservation organization, and one of our biggest partners is the National Park Service. We work very closely with them, and we help save properties that they can't move fast enough to save. And we try and get properties that we do save into parks. So we work very, very closely with them. There's grant funding that Congress appropriates that they administer. So they are the ones that basically came to us and said, a little bit more than 10 years or so ago, would you consider expanding your mission into the Revolutionary War? And so when your biggest partner asks you to consider something, you do it. And it just made all kinds of sense to us. Just the timing, and still all the work that needed to be done. Most people, I come across people all the time, Rick, who still think, wow, I hear what you guys are doing. I like it. Aren't all the battlefields already saved? I've been to Gettysburg. I've been to Yorktown. I've been to Saratoga. I thought everything was saved. No, that's just not the case. There's still tens of thousands of acres of truly hallowed ground that have never been protected. They're under private ownership, which is fine, but it means that, bad things can happen to those historic places if those people decide to sell for development. But specifically on the Rev War, and specifically germane to close to where you sit, when we moved into the Revolutionary War preservation sphere, what we really noticed was how much in South Carolina in particular was unprotected. And so many of those battlefields, Eutaw Springs, Blackstocks, Musgrove Mill, Hanging Rock, the list goes on and on. The other thing we found out is that's a story, the Southern campaign of the American Revolution, that's a story that not too many people know.
Well, winners write history, and we lost that other war,
Right.
that Civil War, and so I think most Americans really think that we won the Revolutionary War in Lexington and Concord.
Yeah.
They don't really know the story of the fact that the Southern campaign kept Cornwallis from uniting the English army to defeat Washington. Washington figured out early on, I don't have to win this war. I just don't need to lose this war.
Exactly.
The war of attrition, sooner or later, economically, the folks in Britain are going to say, we got to stop this. This is crazy. But it took the Southern campaign and the time of the Southern campaign to make that a reality.
Absolutely. Yeah, my short 30-second synopsis of the war, especially the war in the South, was that was where we bled Cornwallis white to the point where he staggered into Yorktown, Virginia, expecting to be picked up by the British Navy. Well, the French Navy put a stop to that. And then Washington had the good sense to listen to Rochambeau to come down to Yorktown and bottle him up into the war. But that would not have happened but for the Southern campaign and that
Well, a
bleeding
lot.
Cornwallis White part.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the other thing I think people don't realize, and I think Ken Burns did a good job in the series of this, was this was really our first Civil War.
absolutely.
I mean,
Yes.
especially in the southern states, you had loyalists and you had patriots, and in many cases they were from the same family.
In
Um,
many
and,
cases. Yeah.
and so a lot of the famous battles, Kings Mountain, Cowpens,
Yeah.
were American loyalists fighting against American patriots,
Yeah, we
and
always make that point as well too, and that was actually a major part of the British strategy. You know, they were absolutely convinced that there was this groundswell of loyalist support in the southern colonies that was going to come out and crush these, crazy rebels. And that just did not happen. I mean, like you say, there was brother against brother, but nowhere near the numbers that they expected. And that really blew a big hole in their overall strategy because they couldn't replace their losses. Guilford Courthouse, North Carolina, is a great example of that. And I'm a huge fan of Nathaniel Greene, by the way. Again, a guy who never won a battle, but was strategic enough that he could win the war. Uh, you know, Cornwallis basically won the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, but he was so depleted that the comment after the battle was, any more such victories will ruin us. Yeah, that's a big part of our effort is saving the land and then bringing those battlefields to life in ways they've never been brought to life before through on-site interpretation with new trails, new signs, and then because from where we are in the world today, online interpretation as well, augmented reality. We've got a website that's devoted to our work on this, which we've termed the Liberty Trail. And the Liberty Trail started in South Carolina. I think we've got something like 32 different sites on it now. We've put up more than 50 interpretive signs, miles of walking trails in South Carolina. And then, by the way, when other states got wind of what we were doing down there, they raised their hands and said, please, can we have some too? So we've now expanded into North Carolina, New York, New Jersey, looking at Pennsylvania. So this is basically one of our legacy projects for the 250th, and it's gone great.
well, I had a chance the other day to go walk Fort Fairlawn, and what y'all
Ah,
have done there is amazing. I mean, this is a fort that was built
hmm
by the British that is still there, which is,
yes,
if you think about it, if it had been in any other place other than Monk's Corner, South Carolina, somebody would have developed that land a long time ago,
exactly.
but it literally existed. And when you walk that particular piece of land, you begin to get an understanding, especially of what Francis Marion did, because you
hmm
see the topography and you realized how he was able to do the first of what I guess is called guerrilla warfare, where he would come, pick his spots, make an attack, and retreat back to the swamps.
Right.
And it's a
Yep.
fascinating story in our state.
Oh, absolutely. And the more we worked, the more of those types of stories we uncovered as well too. For me, one of one of the things I'm most proud of that we've done is right in downtown Charleston. You talk about being, developed over, but in Marion Square, right in
Yeah.
the middle of downtown Charleston, there was a fortification there called the Hornwork. And it was a massive fortification, and it was involved even before the siege of Charleston in 1780. But it was however many feet high and with a moat. It was a 30-foot basic obstruction there, and most of it had been lost under development. But through the Liberty Trail and working with our great folks down there at the South Carolina Battlegrounds Trust and others, you can now go and walk Marion Square. We put these inlaid markers
Yeah.
into the ground that basically show you the footprint of the old hornwork. And there's some interpretive copy that tells you, a little bit more about the work and the time and things like that too. I bet probably most people living in Charleston didn't know that they had that type of history right there under their feet.
No, I think
And
again they're so familiar with Civil War history, but they're not
yeah,
familiar with the Rev War history and how important it was. It's interesting. Our state flag is the palmetto palm and the crescent moon. The palmetto palm actually comes from the Battle of Fort Moultrie, where they stacked the palmetto palms that the cannonballs couldn't penetrate. They
yeah,
almost
they
bounced
basically
off
just
of them.
sunk into them, or bounced off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that became our state flag. I would bet most South Carolinians don't know that story.
No, and it's nothing against the educational system in South Carolina or any other place. It's just like you say, the victors write the history, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody else as a native Virginian. Yeah, my recollection is I heard about Lexington and Concord, Bunker Hill. I may have heard something about Kings Mountain and Cowpens, but they were kind of peripheral things. And then hey, Yorktown, and we won the war here. So I had to do a lot of relearning or just plain learning about the Revolutionary War when we started saving some of those sites. I was pretty good on Civil War, still not an expert by any means, but to me, I just love learning. So the fact that I got to go back and spend some time with people like Nathaniel Green and Francis Marion, that's just great. Yeah.
Well, let's go back to the basics. Your organization really is in the land acquisition business to begin with, and you try to restore that to what it looked like at that particular time in history. And then again, you
Correct.
give it away to the National Park Service or to state parks. You've done a great job with state parks in the state of
Hmm.
Virginia. You had a very progressive governor that realized the history of Virginia is a great mecca for tourism
Right.
and a great economic driver. But the other thing that y'all do, David, I think better than anybody is tell the stories. Unfortunately, we don't teach history as much as we need to. And when you don't teach history, you're destined to repeat the same mistakes of the past because you don't remember we've seen this movie before.
Yeah.
But if you haven't seen the movie, you don't know. But y'all really do with your educational programs, your websites, the markers, the augmented reality stuff that you're doing right now.
Hmm.
It is about stories, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Our tagline, if you look under, I'm on my shirt here, but anytime you see our logo, is preserve, educate, and inspire. And so the first step, yes, is to preserve the land before it can be developed and destroyed and denied to future generations. And Rick, we're coming up. We're not quite there, but we're getting close to 64,000 acres that we've saved at more than 160 battlefields in 25 states. Why that's significant is 64,000 acres is that's 100 square miles of preserved battlefield land that, but for us and our members and our organization, it would have been paved over years ago.
Well, we're
So,
all concerned right now about data centers. I
yeah.
mean, I mean, that's been a big controversy in your state in Virginia, but it's becoming kind of a national issue where we're very concerned about sacred land
No question.
becoming a data center.
And I'll touch on that, and then I'll do want to get back to the education aspect of what we do as well too. But yeah, I'm the last 3 years we've been suing 2 counties in Virginia because they did not comply with the processes and the legal steps that they needed to do when they were considering rezonings of properties to allow for data centers. And we're it's kind of like George Washington's strategy. We don't have to win, we just don't have to lose. And we've actually been winning in the courts. And in one case, it would have been the largest data center development on planet Earth, immediately adjacent to the Manassas battlefield in Virginia. That's now going to the Virginia Supreme Court. We've won at the appellate court levels. The county has dropped out of the suit. One of the two data center developers has dropped out. One of them is staying in. And so I got to keep spending money on attorneys. No offense to attorneys who might be listening or watching, but I'd rather spend my members' money on land and education. But we have to fight. When they break the rules, we have to fight.
You do.
But back to the education aspect, Rick, I didn't intend when I started this job about 5.5 years ago to become the education president, but I've had to, and this organization has had to. We used to do a little bit of education and a ton of preservation. We're still doing a ton of preservation, and it gets more expensive every day. But we've had to increase our efforts on the education side as well. And I pulled up some statistics. Pardon me for reading them, but haven't used them for a while. They might be a little bit dated, but I don't think they've been any better. And it goes to exactly what you were talking about, which from our perspective and my perspective talks to the collapse of history education in this country. And what that means for our country going forward, more importantly. There was something a few years ago called the Morning Consult Poll, and they asked respondents if they were proud to live in the United States. Well, and this is germane to your podcast here, 73% of baby boomers said, yes, I'm proud to live in the United States of America. I'm glad you're sitting down. Only 16% of Gen Z respondents, which are 18 to 25, replied affirmatively to that. That's a problem. Now, I know young people are, sometimes jaded and et cetera, but that's a pretty yawning gap. There was another one that I think shows how these things have traveled in tandem. A Wall Street Journal, University of Chicago poll that they conducted a few years back. They tracked people's respondents to this statement over many years. And the statement is, patriotism is a very special value to me. And in 1998, so, 28 years ago, 70% agreed with that statement, that patriotism is a special value to me. In 2019, that had dropped a little bit to 61%. But just a couple of years ago, only 38% of the people that they surveyed said patriotism is a special value to me. But it's worse than that because the baby boomers were pulling up that number. If you take the baby boomers out of it, only 23% of those under 30 said patriotism is important to them. So I think these two things didn't happen in a vacuum. We didn't have a collapse of proficiency in history and civics and social studies education, while at the same time people were no longer feeling patriotic feelings about their country. I think these things are traveling in tandem. And so that's part of what we're trying to do. We're still a relatively small national organization, but we focus on telling authoritative, unbiased history in a way that hopefully is going to inspire people to appreciate what I believe, this country has been the greatest force for good for the greatest number of people in the history of mankind. Perfect? Absolutely not. But we're not whitewashing history, but we're also not teaching people to be cynical and that the American experiments was perpetrated by terrible people from the beginning. No, our country has had a very inspiring history, and look at all the things we've overcome over the years. And that's why it's important to preserve these places, to tell those stories both on the ground and in the classroom and online, and hopefully get back to inspiring people to appreciating this incredible country. What a message for the Fourth,
Well,
really.
yeah, we have this unique intersection right now this month. First of all, we have our 250th, which allows us to celebrate, regardless of your political affiliation, the
Yeah.
freedoms and the history of America. But we also have this World Cup going on. And
Hmm.
what happened was all of these international travelers have come to America and have really talked about the exceptionalism of America.
Yeah,
And
I've been following that. It's a lot
and
of
I
fun.
think I think we've been a great host, and people from all over the world have fallen in love with America and what the American dream means and has meant. And it's
Yeah.
really pretty fascinating. Have you found that the 250th helped you with personal donations? Was there more of an interest from individuals during this period? Um,
Um, I will have to say, because we're about to conclude a major capital campaign that's been going for the last 4 years, and I don't want to blow anything, but the July 4th is our end date, and we've blown past our original goal.
that's
Um,
wonderful.
and most of those people, we absolutely have had some new donors step up, no question. But it's mostly been people who've been with us for years and years and years, just digging a little deeper and making multi-year commitments. Um, Another one, Rick, just show you the generosity of the people who support this cause. We also counted in our campaign people who put us in their estate plans. If they had never told us that they'd done that before, or if they increased the amount in their estate plans. And that's been a substantial part of the campaign. Now, it's not money I can go spend right now, but that's capital that's going to be coming to this organization for years and years, even after I'm gone. And it's just going to help move that mission forward. But yeah, I do have to say I was hoping for even more, but I'm an optimist. So it's been good. Actually, let me say it's been great. But I had always been hoping, we'd see this groundswell of support and double our number of members and things like that. So we're seeing modest growth and but a lot of good interest.
Well, the reason I wanted to have you on is the theme of our podcast series this year is trading success for significance. Aging baby boomers have a chance in their lives now to leave a legacy.
Yeah.
And what a great legacy that someone, as an individual or a family or a foundation, could do to preserve sacred land in America for future generations, where we know y'all going to be great caretakers of that land. You're going to tell great stories. One of the things I want to talk about is I'm on my way later this month to France for a
Oh,
vacation, and I'm going to Alsace-Lorraine, to
okay.
largely the World War One battlefields.
Okay.
And a lot of people don't understand our contributions to the First World War. They know a lot about the Second World War, but not about the First World War. But one of the partnerships that y'all have done that I'm really proud of y'all for doing is y'all formed this partnership with the Congressional Medal of Honor Society
Hmm.
to honor those that have received the Congressional Medal of Honor. And that really began in the Civil War.
It did. It
And
did.
and and so talk a little bit about that partnership, because that really is fascinating to me.
Yeah, this is like you say, the Medal of Honor was born in the U.S. Civil War. Uh, for us, it was just we're saving military history sites, and to be military adjacent with those incredible American heroes was just a natural extension for us. I mean, we are in many cases saving the places where they earned those decorations through their valor. Great place. There's a couple of them at Newmarket Heights outside of Richmond.
Yeah.
Something like 13 medals of honor were awarded. The Slaughter Pen Farm at Fredericksburg, or 5 on property that we've saved. And so, again, it goes back to what you said earlier, Rick, in terms of telling those stories. And all you have to do is sit down and read a couple of the citations of the Medal of Honor recipients, both for the domestic battles here as well as ones like Vietnam or Korea or others. And it just, if you've got any kind of a soul or a heart, it makes you weep, because these were basically kids who did amazing things. And those stories, again, have to be preserved and they have to be told to future generations. And I'm not sure that, but for the work of, the Congressional Medal of Honor Society or us, there are that many people focused on making sure the next generation hears those inspiring stories. So we've put together not just the battlefield land, but working with the society as well, a trail all around the country that helps bring those stories to life. It's the hometowns of the recipients. It's just other places associated with them individually, and it's a diminishing number all the time. And boy, every time I get to meet a group of those guys, it is humbling, and it just makes me feel like I haven't accomplished anything in my life when you're sitting there at a lunch table with 3 Medal of Honor recipients. And just think about what they did when they were, 20, 21, 22-year-old kids.
Yeah, it's very humbling. The ones I've met are all unbelievable individuals, and they're humble, and they're everything good about America.
Well, and almost to a man too, they all say, I'm here and I'm doing this because of my buddies that I left behind. I'm doing this for them. It's not about me. It's not about honoring me. I get to wear the medal and I get to go and everybody shakes my hand and when it gets their picture taken with me, but I'm doing it for those guys. And, they call it living a Medal of Honor life. And it's part of their leadership training for youth in this country as well, that you put something bigger than yourself at the top of the list, duty, honor, country. And, those are all values we desperately need, I think.
Well, we can all earn a Medal of Honor, but we can live a Medal of Honor life, and we can help contribute to tell these stories. Tell our listeners how they can support the American Battlefield Trust.
Oh, well, thank you, Rick. Probably the best and easiest way is to go to our website, and it is a tremendous website, thousands and thousands of pages of content. This is a tricky one. Get ready. It's battlefields.org. So battlefields, plural, .org, and like I say, thousands of pages of content on Revolutionary War battles up through the American Civil War, and actually our education content even goes beyond those battles. Those are the ones in which we save land, but we're finding people are asking us to do more on World War II and the Mexican Wars or the Western Indian Wars, and so we're beginning to add that type of content as well too. And quite candidly, we are the authoritative, unbiased source for that information in the country today. We are routinely cited in news articles all across the country because we don't play politics with history. We tell history right down the middle, warts and all, but not all warts. And people know they can trust the American Battlefield Trust for accurate and unbiased history information.
Well, that's a great way.
Battlefields.org.
Great way for us to leave it. I will say that one of the positives that came out of COVID was that people rediscovered places outside.
They sure did.
A lot of young families said, let's go, let's go to Gettysburg. Let's go to Yorktown. Let's go to Saratoga. Let's go to Marion Square now, in a way, to get outside and see that. There's nothing like being on the site of a sacred battlefield for you to understand the history. And if y'all hadn't done that, I don't think anybody would have ever done it. It took the private sector, a private enterprise, a foundation, to
Yep,
protect what I consider to be sacred land. Camden is a great example of that, where y'all found soldiers' bodies centuries later that had been left where they had fallen. And
that is
then,
correct.
yeah, I mean, what a story that is. And you have stories like that on literally every battlefield that you've protected.
Yeah, it's truly the case that all of these places, and we don't say this lightly, they are hallowed ground. They were hallowed by the blood of American soldiers. There is a real, legitimate power of place. I've talked to enough people in my 26 years of doing this, and I asked them how they got interested in our subject, and so many of them say, "Well, I'd read about all these battles, and that was cool, and then I wanted to go see them." And then they all say almost exactly the next same four words. They say, "I went to the battlefield, and I felt something." And that's real. I know it's real. Not everybody feels it, but enough people do feel it, and they understand that, yeah, it's up to this generation right now to save these places over the next few years, or they're going to be buried under data centers or warehouse distribution centers or residential development. So we've got to go hard and fast right now to save these hallowed places so that future generations can experience that power of place and hopefully come home from each one of those battlefield visits a little bit more inspired to do well in their country and be better citizens.
Well, this weekend, 250 years, we're going to eat a lot of hot dogs. We're going to
Yep.
watch a lot of fireworks, but it's a time to remember freedom has never been free.
Right.
Someone paid the price for all of the blessings that we have in this country, and y'all do a great job of protecting those lands and telling those stories. I can't thank you enough today for being my guest on Shaboom.
Thank you, Rick. I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with your listeners as well. I am, by the way, I just turned 62 last week, so I am the youngest possible baby boomer you could talk about, but I do still consider myself very much a boomer. But yeah, to the extent that if you can fit in a visit to a battlefield at some point here this summer in your celebrations, it's always a wonderful thing to do. Yeah,
David, thanks again. Appreciate you being with us.
you bet, my friend.
Our soundtrack today is all about America. It's all about patriotism. The song of the week is what? Our national anthem. This is the one that the great Whitney Houston sang at the Super Bowl, probably the greatest rendition of the national anthem ever sang. A lot of great singers have sang the national anthem. A lot of people have sang the national anthem. Some of them good, some of them not so good, but Whitney Houston's version is exceptional. We've got the great Kate Smith singing God Bless America, Ray Charles's version of America the Beautiful, God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood. We've got a wonderful song written by Leonard Bernstein and Stephen Sondheim from the Broadway play West Side Story called America. And then a good Georgia boy, James Brown from Augusta, Georgia, had a wonderful song called Living in America. It's a great playlist today here in celebration of our 250th. Well, it's time for the boom. Another great American and another hero of mine we lost recently, his name was Ted Turner. You know him as Captain Outrageous. This was an interesting man. He inherited a business, an outdoor advertising business from his father who had committed suicide. He built that outdoor company into a bigger company and then into a telecommunications juggernaut because he took advantage of satellite technology and built a thing called the Superstation. Later, he built the first 24-hour news network that you know as CNN. Built a great network. Became one of the largest landowners in America, grew more bison than anybody else in America, gave more money away maybe than anybody else, gave all his money away. Recently, another hero of mine is the great writer Peggy Noonan, who writes for the Washington Post. And she wrote a great op-ed that I'm going to read to you now. It's called, Is America Still Making Ted Turners? All media this week rang with Ted Turner's accomplishments and achievements. And if you lived through his rise, the sound of his name brought a wistful smile. What a crazy, fabulous American man. He bought MGM's library of films and invented Turner Classic Movies to play them. He bought the Atlanta Braves, put them on his superstation, and called them America's team. He flirted with bankruptcy, placed big bets, took big swings, captained the winning yacht in the 1977 America's Cup, and at the end was too drunk to finish his victory speech on live television. The man was epic. He told Ben Mankiewicz of Turner Classic Movies that he wasn't a maverick. I just thought a lot. I was smart enough to think things through. He knew people would want 24-hour movies, great ones, classics, but silly ones too, because silly is part of life. People like old stuff. Every thought worth uttering, everything that is true can be said in plain, clear words, and often quickly. Ted Turner spoke as if he knew that. But it was 1980 and CNN, which he invented out of nothing, that was his greatest achievement. He stated his stated philosophy: the news is the star. He believed this for two reasons. One was the news was literally what he was selling, 24/7 TV news from all over the place. The other is that the idea of a 24-hour all-news television channel was so stupid, there was no proof people wanted this, that the only people who would work for him were guys who had crashed out of the broadcast networks, kids nobody had ever heard of, and people who were good but had not yet hit stardom. He didn't have stars, and he made a virtue out of that. 11 years in came the indelible event, the Gulf War. Everyone wanted to know what was happening, and CNN was on the ground in Iraq with reporters, cameras, sound crew, and a bureau. The night sky, the fiery explosions in the distance, the satellite feed straight from Baghdad, the world watching a war live, and the correspondents, Peter Arnett, Bernard Shaw, who said, "The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated." It moves you, the memory of the excellence of it. They were stars now. For a long time after that, when something happened, big happened, you'd call your friends and you didn't say put on TV, you called them and said put on CNN. Ted's death has me thinking about the world in which he rose. He was born into a political and economical context that simply allowed him to be him. That was good, because we need renegades, brigands, and pirates. We want their visions and breakthroughs. We want their spirit. Go for broke. Trust your brain. Be wild. Insist. Announce you are here. How many jobs, livelihoods that allow families to be stable and continue through time did Ted Turner create? America is going to be making its decisions the next 2, 4, and 10 years on what economic direction it wishes to go. I continue to sense that, departing from past assumptions about the efficacy of economic freedom and free markets, I see a rising tide of progressive economic thought and coming together to some degree of populist right and populist left. Inflation erodes confidence in the future. The psychic blow of 2008 still reverberates. Young voters, especially millennials, remember those days of anxiety. Capitalism sure didn't look good and has few regular, articulate, and compelling defenders. What I see coming is a rising thirst for safety and a kicking away from the world that made Ted Turner possible. She goes on to say, freedom is messy and ugly, but it's the only thing that works. It is the only condition that creates beauty. It creates the wealth that lets us push our way past our constant failures of personal compassion, sympathy, and encouragement, so that those who don't win are fed and housed and can live. A word about this moment. Its mood is poor. We've gotten sodden and heavy in our thinking about our world. We live in late-stage capitalism. It is the post-liberal order in an ever-failing Rome. Populist intellectuals have fallen half in love with death, nukes, pandemics, and we're all just holding on. Only the greediest dullards seem to have kept their focus. It makes everything feel sad, defeated. As a way of thinking, it is understandable, but it doesn't help us, and it's unworthy of life. We have to proceed with spirit, with energy, in spite of everything, and energy that amounts to a kind of love. The lift of a driving dream, Richard Nixon called it. We aren't truly ourselves without it. Once in a playbill before seeing Long Day's Journey into Night, I read that Eugene O'Neill believed tragedy brought an urge towards life and even more life. Yes, let the horror leave you hungry. Buy that team, man that station, win that race, and get so drunk you can barely grip the champagne bottle to wave it in the air. It's the only way to go. It's the only way to be. That's the great Peggy Noonan on Ted Turner. It's time to take our trip down memory lane. I was trying to think of my favorite July 4th of all time, and I finally realized when it was. It was 1974. I am working on a shrimp boat in Frogmore, South Carolina, down in Beaufort County, and I worked for a guy named Norman Gay Fish Company. I had camped on the beach in February of 74, wintertime, camping on the beach with a girlfriend, and I looked over and saw a man that had got his truck stuck in the sand. You could still drive your cars on the beach in South Carolina that era, and for some reason he had gotten his truck stuck, and I went over and said, "Can I help you?" He said, "Yeah, can you help me?" And we got some boards out and back, and I helped get him out and get him out of the deal. Older man, and he said, "I'm Norman Gay, and son, if you ever want a job, come see me." He gave me his card. Well, I thought, man, what could be more romantic than working on a shrimp boat? And I ended up showing up, and I got a job, worked on the shrimp boat. Well, that summer, on the 4th of July, we decorated the shrimp boats. We decorated them in all kinds of red, white, and blue stuff, and then we did a parade of shrimp boats on the 4th of July. Ate, boiled shrimp, fried shrimp, crabs, barbecue. One of the great things. What made it so great? Same thing that makes America great. Great people. Great people. Some of the best people I've ever known working there that summer. Y'all, it is our people. Our United Taste of America trips we've been taking, we've just met great people all over this country. They're in the hospitality business. These are people in the restaurant business. Again, what makes America great is the people. And there were some great people on Frogmore, South Carolina on July 4th, 1974. And that's my trip down memory lane. It's time to get back on the road with Rick. Speaking of the United Taste of America, we're celebrating our independence. And as we celebrate our independence, we celebrate a very important figure in American history, General and later President George Washington. Mr. Washington's home was a place called Mount Vernon, and if you haven't been to Mount Vernon, you need to go there. It is a very, very special place. At Mount Vernon is a place called the Mount Vernon Inn, and they make a very famous peanut soup, and that's the soup we featured in our United Taste of America segment on Virginia. They also make colonial cornbread, some of the best cornbread I've ever had. Then you can get maybe a roasted turkey pot pie, or how about a crab cake dinner? Great food at an amazing place with wonderful people. Mount Vernon, the Mount Vernon Inn on the road with Rick. It's time for the last word. Mr. Jefferson wrote that we were seeking a more perfect union. The key word is more. I thought perfect was perfect, but that's simply not the case. Our forefathers knew this when they wrote and signed these words, because we continued down that path through slavery, women's suffrage, voting rights, immigration, and rights to those who may be a little different from the rest of us. A more perfect union. Let's all do our part as we start the 251st year of America. And that's the perfect way to end Shaboom this week. We'll be back here again next week with another episode of Shaboom.